Welcome to Promoting Conservative Values in Modern Europe. Please welcome the President of the Heritage Foundation, Dr. Kevin Roberts.
Thank you all. It's great to see you here, and of course, many people who are tuning in live, and I'm sure will watch a recording if they miss this. It's a pleasure to welcome you to the Heritage Foundation. It's always a pleasure to welcome friends from around the world, and it is perhaps true that there is no greater friend to American conservatism than the Hungarian government. We're honored today, therefore, to be joined by Hungary's Minister of Justice, Judit Varga. Minister Varga was nominated to the role by Prime Minister Viktor Orban in June 2019. She previously served as Minister of State for EU relations as well as policy advisor to 3 members of the European Parliament, including Hungary's former president. She holds a judicial degree and served as a judicial law clerk at the Metropolitan Court of Budapest. Perhaps most importantly, and I say this as a father of 4, the minister is the mother of 3 boys. Upon taking office in July 2019, the Prime Minister's congratulatory message to Minister Varga was, "A new striker joins the team," a reference to her football, or as we say here in the United States, soccer background. But also, no doubt, to her ability and willingness to go on offense to advance and defend conservative values, something we value here at Heritage. It is a critical moment for societal values both here and in Europe, and Minister Varga is at the center of several key policy positions and efforts. As you noticed, Europe is undergoing its own versions of the culture wars. The validity of conservative principles at the individual level, such as traditional family-oriented values, and at the national level, such as the defense of sovereignty, are subjects of increasingly intense debate in the European community. We see this occasionally in the United States as well. It's important for all of us to understand how the conservative community around the world is evolving. Rather than hear the media pontificate or others talk about Europeans, we should be listening to the Europeans and especially to the Hungarians. So it's very timely that we have an opportunity this afternoon to hear Minister Varga's remarks on promoting conservative values in modern Europe. After her remarks, we'll have a deeper discussion moderated by my colleague Aaron Walsh, our Senior Research Fellow for International Relations in the Allison Center for Foreign Policy. And then hopefully we'll be able to get a couple of questions from you in the audience. With that, would you please join me in giving a warm welcome to our friend, Hungarian Minister of Justice, Judit Varga.
Thank you very much, dear ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon. It's an honor for me to be here. I'm coming very far away from here. So actually, after this very nice introduction, I humbly thank you for the opportunity to present the Hungarian conservative policy, which might be of a common benefit for all our fights in our countries for this case. And about myself, I rather identify myself with a mother of 3 who had been pushing the trolley 5 years ago in Brussels around Schuman Square, not dealing with high-level politics. I was just doing my everyday business as a policy advisor in the European Parliament, and I dig myself down into the dossiers of everyday life, be it industry policy or any kind of European Union policy. And then I realized day by day how this European Union, with the progressive liberal trend, is actually infringing on the sovereignty of the nation states. And when, after the elections in 2018, Minister Gulyás called me and said, "Hey, come home, be State Secretary for European Affairs," we all felt with my husband and family that it is the time we have to come home, and what we actually, like a sponge, we put into ourselves as an experience about the real functioning of the whole European Union. We have to now serve the country with this background and try to make ourselves understood by our partners so that we can continue a successful conservative policy for Hungary. So thank you very much for the attention. Thank you very much for your curiosity. We are quite happy these days because we just won the 4th consecutive term with 2/3 majority. So this is already the 5th Orbán government, but the 4th in a consecutive row since 2010. And why I'm saying this is that this national conservative policy proved to be workable over time. And we have also evidence. Just to name a few, we promised in 2010 that we will base our society on the value of work. And we promised that we will increase the active workers in the country by 1 million. In a country of 10 million, where 8 million adults are living. So it's really a huge number. And we actually made it by 2021. We reached this plus 1 million worker. So this was just one example of the conservative politics that it is also can bring economic development to a country. And we proved that not only the liberal recipe may work for the benefit of the country, but also other recipes like Christian democratic or national conservative recipe. And dear ladies and gentlemen, just to mention the most important actuality of these days, yesterday Hungary commemorated the 66th anniversary of the 56th revolution. And if you have heard about this, I'm sure that you also noticed that Hungarians have a genuine desire for freedom. And it is the way there are landmarks of 1848 revolution against Habsburg monarchy, then the 56th revolution against Soviet tanks, and then we had the democratic change in 1990, where we finally reached our freedom. And today, dear ladies and gentlemen, we are living in a period of crisis. Especially in Europe, we see a threefold crisis: the political, the economic, and the value crisis. And I would like to just give some hints on all those three branches. And I will define our policy in the framework of the European Union, because I know that it is very difficult from very far to know about the tiny little details about the member states' relationship in the European Union. But if I define our policy vis-à-vis the European mainstream politics, then you can grab the essence of our everyday fight within this union. And why we are actually a problem for the liberal mainstream is that we proved that the three concepts, the protection of sovereignty, the consistent representation of the conservative values, and the democratic state governed by the rule of law, they are reconcilable. So to be rule of law member state, you can pursue a conservative policy as well. So it's not only the liberal state which can be governed by rule of law, but also with conservative values, you can manage to remain within the framework of the rule of law state. And the success of our government is actually proved by this very strong mandate given by the voters. On the 3rd of April, actually, there was 54% of the Hungarian voters opting for the Conservative Party, Fidesz, and its ally, the Christian Democratic Party. And out of 6 million votes, we gained more than 3,060,000. So this is a very, very valuable and strong mandate, which allows us to govern without any kind of coalition pressure or coalition need, where we are not forced to compromise on our values. And this is a very, very unique situation for us in Europe, where we are having partner countries with fragile coalitions, where everyone is in the coalition, right wing, left wing, at least 4 or 5 parties are nowadays on the top of member states. which then prevents them from being identical to their values, because they always have to compromise, even in internal politics, not to mention European politics. And the challenges what we are facing in this threefold crisis are political one and also ideological one. And here I would like to define the relationship of the European Union and the member states. Because when we joined the European Union, we all believed that the sovereign right will be respected, as it is stated in the treaties. And we all know that population, territory, and sovereignty defines the state. And when the European Union was founded, the founding idea was that some part of the sovereignty is not given up, but some part is jointly practiced of each member state's sovereignty so that they can be successful together in certain areas. But these areas are strictly regulated in the treaties. These areas are like the customs union, the common market, all those very practical things which make our lives easier and guarantee the prosperity of the whole European Union. But it was crystal clear by the time of joining the European communities that certain areas remain untouchable because they are core and essential part of our sovereignty. This is how we define family, what is our position on migration, what is our position on nation, what is our position on the future of the whole community. And these parts of our sovereignty were never, ever conferred on the common institutions of the European Union. Because we think that member states, the success, the key to the success of the whole union is lying in the successfulness of each nation state. If we are not successful alone, and if we cannot cherish each other's success, there's no chance for us to be successful together. And what we see, unfortunately, and this is why I'm talking about a challenge, that the European Union today is building a Europe without nations. This is actually tangible in the phenomenon how they outsource democracy to those international networks of NGOs which are not entrusted by the civil society in each member state, but they are funded internationally, and their power is really huge to influence public opinion, especially in the European Union. And this is how the everyday functioning of the European Union is not relying on the member states' governments' positions and political guidance, but rather on the institutions who are actually captured by these international NGOs. This is why we say that we need to fix this. We need to bring back the democracy of democracies to Europe. It means that elected and incumbent responsible governments shall come together frequently to show the political guidance, because these governments are responsible for their nations, for the economic success, for all kinds of questions of society. But what we see that because of the looming enlargement of competencies and in a union where law does not really exist anymore because there are no consequences if we don't operate by the rules, they are overcoming the sovereignty and the sovereign decisions of the member states. And this is how we end up in a European Union without real democracy, only this outsourced type of democracy. But we always think that member states shall remain the masters of the whole European Union. They are also defined by the treaty like the highest political body who is working on the culture of consensus. You often hear, I think, if you read news about Hungary, that we are vetoing everything or we are blocking decisions. But it is not correct. Let us just analyze this situation. The word veto is not existing in the treaties. In the treaty, there is only the culture of consensus, which means that there is no decision as long as everybody is happy with the outcome of that negotiating procedure. But unfortunately, we can see it quite recently and more often that they are trying to corner some member states because the political mainstream, does not want to take care about each and every member state's interest. They're trying to left behind some of those member states who are not really happy with the mainstream liberal line and would require, based on the treaty, consensual rules and culture, some kind of attention towards our national essential interest. And this is why we are actually forced to say no at the end, based on our right to unanimity. So we should just come back to the status quo and should focus more on the culture of consensus, which is actually resulting in a much more, it's a stronger decision, because if it's everybody's decision and everybody was on board, the decision will be implemented much more easier at the end. And this was not said by a Hungarian minister, it was already said by other ministers in the council when we had a very hot discussion quite recently whether unanimity should cancel in the European decision making. And we said, no, unanimity is actually the ultimate help for those member states who are not falling within the mainstream because of their democratic mandate. We got a mandate from our citizens, and they entrusted us with the conservative value defense, and if the common majority decision is not aligned with this mandate, we have to say no. And this is why it would be better to start all the discussion turning to each and every member state and asking them, is this good for you? Show me your numbers. How can we have a good compromise? But instead of this, there is an ever-growing situation when this veto is coming up more and more often, because the rights of the smaller member states, or those member states who are not fitting the line, are not fully respected. And this is why, in the framework of the Future of Europe conferencing exercise, what we had over the last 2 years, Hungarian citizens were very active, because we have already almost 2 decades of experience about this membership, what it means for us in practice. And the Hungarian citizens were actively participating. We had 800 conferences, a lot of contributions online from the citizens, because we still have a pro-European approach, how we could preserve this community as it was so prosperous in the past, how it can continue to be prosperous and preserving true democracy. And this is why Hungarians have a very strong view about the future of the European Union. And they say that we should make the democracy of democracies. So, for example, what if the incumbent parliaments would send their representatives to the European Parliament, so that they have a closer link to the real democracy in each member state? Because the European Parliament, by definition, became a body which is ideology-driven, where international NGOs can have a great forum to enhance their own ideological views, but it has nothing to do with the real will of the peoples of Europe. And this is why we recommend, if there is a reform of the European Union, to elect or to send members of the European Parliament from among the members of the national parliaments, like in the case of the Council of Europe. Another idea is that an ever closer union, the concept of the ever closer union, should be removed from the treaties. If you remember, when the Brits had the vote on Brexit, Cameron promised, if we stay, then I will renegotiate this sentence in the treaties, because this is actually the problem of many things. How do we define the ever closer union? It is actually by nature resulting in a supranational state at the end, because how can we be ever closer? I see what the Luxembourg Court of Justice is doing, the European Court of Justice. Even if there's no legal base for certain measures which they enact by political majority, and some member state is challenging this decision in front of the Luxembourg Court, there is a judgment which approves the looming enlargement of competencies. And this is how we end up in an ever closer union, when they are touching upon the sovereign parts of the nations, when we are defining our family policy, for example, or Child Protection Act, or migration laws. They are by this looming exercise of the competencies and approved and justified by the Court of Justice judgments, we are ending up in a situation where we have no tools anymore to protect our sovereignty as a nation state. So this is why we offer to remove this part from the treaties so that we make it clear which belongs to common competencies, where there can be a European Union legislation, and where are the sovereign barriers, and where are those topics and areas which cannot be touched by the European institutions. And this all leads us to an ideological pressure, the most important political challenge, that the European Union is currently, unfortunately, building a union of hegemony and of opinions. So while previously the motto of the Union was, and still this is the effective motto, united in diversity, what we see every day is that unity, rather homogeneity, is much more important than diversity. But what we say that diversity is as important as unity. This is how Europe is so unique, because we all have a different pathway in our history, how we get to our current democracies, and our strength lies in the respectful mutual cooperation. So there cannot be only one ideology being a hegemon ideology in the European Union, and this should not be an alignment, a pressured alignment of opinion, but it should always be a respectful cooperation. And a good old tool to align member states, to which I already referred to in the beginning of my introduction, this blackmailing tool is the rule of law procedures. There are a wide range of variety of rule of law procedures. I myself witnessed many of them, and this is my everyday job, to take part in these rule of law discussions. I think there are lawyers also in the room. We all know from our studies from the law school that there is no one-size-fits-all solution to the rule of law setup of a member state or any country or any democracy. There are only principles and some standards. But how exactly, for example, the judiciary looks like, how many judges do we have in the Supreme Court, how constitutional court judges are elected, whether there are 15 members to it, whether there is at all a constitutional court in any country, because not every member state in the European Union have a separate constitutional court. So what I'm trying to say that in rule of law discussion, only a constitutional discussion is possible. When constitutional lawyers or judges are having a nice conversation, and they can change best practices, and we can learn from each other. But just because we are not the same line from a political perspective, it does not mean that that country which is not taking the same line is infringing any principle of rule of law. And unfortunately, quite recently, we are witnessing a trend where certain member states who have a national conservative government, for example, Poland, Hungary, and now quite recently Italy, they are blackmailed with rule of law tools. I think before the Italian elections, President von der Leyen had a lecture in New York. And you may have heard about it. And he said, if Italy is not behaving well, then we have the right to. And you know, the Italian citizens, they were quite upset about this, because what shall this mean to us? Why is she saying this? And I could quote sentences like this concerning Hungary as well, when I think it was the Maltese commissioner who said, we have the tools to force a member state to take the line if they don't want to take the line because they have a different political view. So what I see from this whole development is, unfortunately nowadays in the European Union, the political preferences and tastes are mixed up with legal issues. And I learned at the law school that we have values which we all share: freedom, democracy, respect for human dignity, non-discrimination, etc., which are listed in Article 2. But all these values are reflected in certain laws, because the laws are there to protect these values. But if we are talking about political positions like we are a pro-migration or non-migration, or what is your position towards mass illegal migration? Some member states, they say it's okay, but it is our sovereign right to say it's not okay because we don't support mass illegal migration. Or what is the family concept of our countries? It is up to the sovereign member states how they define family, for example. We respect other member state decision, but we also expect the respect for our definition of the family. And here we are talking about political preferences, mentality, traditions. It's not a legal issue. It's when we are talking about legality, it means that if we have a family concept, our law will guarantee that this concept is safeguarded in the member state, in the country. So the rules and the laws are there to protect values and also the traditions of the member states. And unfortunately, today we are facing a European Union when preferences, political positions are mixed up with the legality, and this is how they stigmatize certain member states with this very unfair accusation that you are not a real democracy or not a real rule of law. Just a historic hint, 800 years ago, exactly 800 years ago, we had our Hungarian Magna Carta. We just celebrated. Magna Carta, when there's a deed, defining the legal situation, legal relationships in the society vis-à-vis the ruler. The Magna Carta, we all know that it was in 1215 in the UK, or at that time not UK, but in England. And just 7 years later, in Hungary, we already had our own Magna Carta. So when we are talking about rule of law, I don't know, experience, we have quite a strong experience of 800 years in our country to base the functioning of the state on legal documents. So I don't want to be too long because we have a discussion ahead of us. But finally, let me just give some remarks on the economic challenges, what we have. I think here again, life proves that if we don't respect the freedom of member states to act, we will not be able to face the challenges of the economy. The COVID crisis also showed that the first responders of the COVID challenge were the member states, because our voters expected us to buy enough masks, to buy enough vaccines. We could not wait for the common position, for the common purchase system. And this is how, in Hungary, we managed to have vaccines even 4 months before the European Union could provide this for us. And this is how we could rebound our economy 4 months before others could restart it, because it was about the vaccination. So the first responders were the member states, and this is how we managed to protect our citizens. And here we are facing a great threat of economic recession, because there is a war in the closest vicinity of Europe, and the answers given to this war are also affecting the economies of Europe. These are the sanctioning policy and also the energy policy. So here we also always fight for the freedom of the member state to have its own energy mix by defining common goals, how to have a diverse supply of energy resources, what are the percentages in the nearest future. But since there are so many national character and specificities of the energy market in each member state, we cannot sign up to a one-size-fits-all solution. And this is why we also fight here for our sovereignty to have the right to determine how and by which schedule we will get rid of the dependency of the fuels and the energy resources for Hungary. And Prime Minister Orbán quite recently said, even though everyday life might be more difficult these days because of this threat of global recession, we still should not forget about our long-term objectives, which we should always look at on the horizon. And these objectives is, as I just recall our conservative policy, work, innovation, and knowledge should always be supported, because this is key for the long-term economic success. We have to diversify our energy mix based on sovereign decisions, not forced from a center decision-making institution, and which is even more important, the family policy, because we have a very wide range of tools to support young couples and families in Hungary so that we can fight the demographic challenge. And we spend 5% of our GDP on family financial support schemes, which is at least the double of the European average. And even there are difficult times for our economy, we will not forget about this long-term objective, and we will continue to support our extensive family financing support scheme. So thank you very much for your attention. I'm looking forward to our discussion, and I'm also looking forward to your questions. Thank you very much.
Well, Madam Minister, that was wonderful. Actually, a seminar, it was so great. I mean, many of the things that I was going to actually touch on, you really covered. I mean, Hungary has done such an amazing job, and certainly you under your leadership, and the President Orban's has been quite something over the last several years. The Orban government has championed policies which defend and seek to preserve the Hungarian character. It seems now, for instance, with the elections in Italy, other nations are echoing the importance of preserving their national character, a little bit different than what you just talked about in the EU. Can you talk about why it's so important for Hungary, and perhaps share some of those efforts that you've undertaken to achieve just that?
Because, can you hear me? Yes, thank you very much.
As I said, you know, the key to Europe's success is the key of the success of its nations. And we think that there is a basic difference, for example, to the United States of America and the United States of Europe, because there is always a political will at the federalist side to get there someday. But you know, the starting point is completely different. How you evolve to be this beautiful country, and how European countries who always fought each other throughout the centuries come to the cooperative format of the European Union. And if we lose our colors, if we lose our national character, we will, I think, lose the key to the success. Because all what we see here, that there is a constant attempt to demolish those building blocks of the nation, like family, like the historic church, this regional cooperation, local communities, which at the end add up the nation and the sovereign feeling. And if we lose all this, what will be next? It's like just profit-oriented, supranational, multinational company will be the European Union. I see a lot of danger on the horizon. The European Parliament just came up with an idea that during the next European elections, we should have supranational lists, electoral list. Can you imagine how a Hungarian citizen will vote somebody on the list who has nothing to do with that country? What this will have as a consequence that that person, of course, will not fight for Hungarian interests, but at least for the interest of his country of origin, or her country of origin, or some other interests which are supranational interests. And then we will be a homogeneous, faceless mass of citizens, and not respecting our Christian heritage, not respecting our families, our national traditions. And then this is, of course, it can be criticized, this point of view. But we Hungarians, we share all this view that we would like to stay who we are for the next 1,000 years. And that's why we always fight back any attempts which would just infringe upon our freedom. And in order to understand the Hungarian position, we have to go back to history. We always could trust our national feeling and freedom fight when we had to get rid of external invasion, because we were invaded by the Turks, we had Soviet tanks. So for us, the nation is a positive concept. It's not a threat to our values. On the contrary, this is the key to our survival as a nation. And we do know that there are other nations whom had a negative connotation with the concept nation. And this is why they had, for example, internally a problem during their history. And from external help, they could get rid of this problem. And this is why, for them, the concept nation has a different connotation. So in this kind of Europe, there is no one-size-fits-all solution. We can only trust each other if we respect each other's history, each other's sovereignty, and then try to find those common lines when we can successfully cooperate, but not touching upon those areas which cannot be reconciled. And this is why we think that this is the key for the future of Europe.
That's fantastic. Just touching on Italy for a moment, the recent elections, and how you see, is there a movement across Europe that might be picking up on some of this, so that you, and perhaps Poland, would not be facing just in isolation what you have been fighting for?
Actually, the Polish-Hungarian friendship is centuries old, and we are still united in our fight for strong nations of a strong Europe. We see very positive trends, let's say. We are very happy about the Italian election result. In Sweden, we also see that a right-wing coalition is being formed. I think our next big step or big event will be the 24 European elections. And we have to be all national conservatives and right-wing parties and politicians. We should be preparing for this election. And I don't think that the titles and the formats should matter. What should matter that we have to believe that we are capable of gaining ground and having better positions for the whole right wing in the European Union than before in the 2019 elections. And by this very constant crisis of the everyday lives, where energy prices are rising high, there's a wartime inflation all across Europe. I think it will also have an effect that politicians will be forced to look at what their citizens need. Even if they don't look, then they will be protesting, and they are politicians should look out the window and look at the streets, what's going on, because people require their politicians to deal with their own everyday problems. And unfortunately, with this bubble, with this very liberal and progressive trend in Europe, politics is detached from the reality. There is only the media who is conveying the message, distorting also the information from the society, and the liberal elites in a bubble, in an ivory tower, are generally governing Europe, except for Hungary and then some countries. And with this very concrete challenge of the everyday life, I think this will change. This will change because, with ideology, you cannot cook. With ideology, you cannot heat your homes. So reality will be knocking at the door, actually already knocks at the door. So this might have a positive effect for the right-wing parties in Europe to be closer to the reality and not to deal with ideologies, but deal with the everyday needs of the citizens, which is, I think, the core element of the conservative politics.
Exactly. Well, 2024 is going to be a big year for all of us, I think. Just another question before we open it up for just a couple of minutes, if you don't mind. I just wanted to ask you what, clearly here in the United States, you've seen and read that we are facing many of these same things with this woke ideology, which is impacting so much here from the schools. And you said when we were talking just before this, and Dr. Robertson as well, about the importance of family, and you were riding around with your children and pushing them in the pram. What are some of the things specifically that conservatives that you're seeing in Hungary, what have you done to sort of address these issues, to sort of push back against this ideology, this progressive ideology, and what can you share with conservatives here?
Thank you very much. This is a very important topic, and this is the best forum to discuss among ourselves. We are in a lucky situation because we realize that there is a trend that what is happening in the Western societies, it is most probably after 20 years is also happening in our societies. So we only had to just look at the civil society challenges in the US, in the western part of Europe, and we had enough time to prepare for the challenge because we are in a position to decide whether we want to get into this situation or not. And this is why we amended the Constitution, or inserted an amendment which is a guarantee that every child has a right to its its sex at birth, which is corresponding to his sex at birth. And this is just a very normal sentence, which then gives the possibility to derive the right of the child and the right of the parents to determine how this child should be educated when he or she is still a minor. And this right of the parent to determine the education of the child is actually guaranteed by the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union. They are actually stating that in line with national laws, it is the parent who shall determine, based on his philosophical, pedagogical, and cultural convictions, what kind of education this child should get. So this is how we excluded any kind of external interference into the education, unwanted interference, and the parents' agreement is needed so that the child gets any kind of education, and also the propaganda is just closed out of the schools and kindergartens. So this is there's a clear line between adults and children. Any adult in my country can live the way they want. We are helping everyone to live freely. All the human rights are justified and guaranteed at the criminal, constitutional, and civil law level. So Hungary is a very free country. As an adult, you can live the way you wish, and this way of living is fully respected not only by the society but also by the legal system. But when it comes to our children, we shall have a guarantee for the families and parents to determine in which circumstances this child grows up, even when they are not at home. So this is why this kind of protection level is inserted into our laws, which is again guaranteed, or this possibility is there in the fundamental rights charter of the European Union. So this is what we did actually.
Safe there.
Yes.
Great. Well, let's open it up. I think we have time for one or two questions.
Why does Hungary stay?
Sorry?
Why does it remain in the EU with all the differences and challenges?
To stay?
Why do you stay?
Yes, thank you very much. It's a good question because we always belonged to Europe. And in the national credo, because we have a constitution and the constitution begins with the national credo. And there we state that we are proud of the fact that throughout the centuries, Hungarians, with their fights, they give their blood to enrich European values and to protect Europe, because we always belonged to Europe. Unfortunately, during the communism, for more than 40 years, we were legally not allowed to be members of Europe, but we've been always there. And there is a good saying when a parent or a teacher is actually, arguing with the child, that I'm not angry against you, I'm angry for you. And I think Hungary is this child in the European Union who is always angry for the European future, because we see that those trends where Europe is actually denying its own values, its Christian roots, its traditions, then it is destroying itself. And the way how we act as a member of the European Union, the consequences of our actions are always beneficial for the whole European Union. Otherwise, we would not do it. And once Prime Minister said that I'm European because I'm Hungarian. If I were not Hungarian, I could not be European either. So the national affiliation and relationships, the primary relationship for every nation in Europe to be able to be defined as being European. And I also give you an example. Quite recently, there was a proposal from the European Commission to have an oil embargo as a sanction. The oil, which is one of the primary fuel resources for European economy. And since there was a constant pressure that we have to push this through, said the European Commission, they did not go to each and every capital to ask for the economic data, how much percentage of your industry and energy production relies on Russian oil. They just, from top down, they had a proposal, which was, of course, supported by most of the member states who are not dependent on this oil. And then, we were there, only alone who were brave enough to speak up loudly that, sorry, but you are killing our economy. If you kill us, it will also affect you. And not to mention that there were other member states who are not in this very optimal political position as the Hungarian government, that we can speak our mind because we have a strong support from the citizens. And there are fragile coalitions, which I said, and some other member states who are also dependent on Russian oil. They were not in a position to speak up loudly because they were also fear of the consequences. You see the consequences, you are named and shamed and stigmatized. So we fought until our last blood. So we fought for a kivétel exception, sorry. My Hungarian English is not the best. So we fought for an exemption of the pipeline oil for certain countries. So you see, it was only us playing the bad cop. But at the end of the day, many other member states and the whole European economy is actually benefiting from this bravery. And usually this is the typical pattern. And this is why I'm always saying this is the rule of law issues or the veto is a political question. It's not a legal question. And we have a very good election result. This is why we dare to speak the minds of our citizens. I'm always saying to the voters when we are campaigning, what is on your heart, it is on my mouth. So I can clearly represent this mandate in the council. And we also think that the best alternative for any kind of international cooperation it is evidently and obviously the European Union for Hungary, because we've always been here. And maybe because your question just, stimulates me to tell you more about us. So if you allow me, we just commemorated the 56th revolution. And when we finally, in 1989, we were liberated from this dictatorship, from the Soviet Union, we had so much expectations to be free, what it means to belong to the free West. And over time, we realized that it's another world where there is a newspeak in the European Union. So we deliberated ourselves from a dictatorship when you spoke your political mind and you were taken to jail. So it was really a very bad time for democracy and for free speech. There was no freedom of speech. And then when we finally got our freedom, we joined another political community when, because of this liberal progression and political correctness, there was another new language which we did not want to learn. And the French philosopher who is not a Hungarian, no Hungarian origins, she is just dealing a lot with our country's history. And she said, Chantal Delsol is actually the philosopher, a very famous French philosopher, is a great woman. And she said that the former Central European ex-socialist countries, they remind her of the father who left for the war and came home and did not find the same family what he left before he went away. Because we had a dream about Europe, and we always wanted to belong politically and legally to the European Union and to the communities. But by the time we got there, we got rid of the chains of communism, we did not find the same family anymore because it was already captivated by this very progressive liberal trend. That time in the 90s was not so easily recognizable, but the roots were already there. And when in 2010, after many years of socialist and liberal governments in Hungary, Prime Minister Orbán declared this national conservative policy that let's reconquer our country. And let's put Hungary first, or let's put our interest first, as every other country in the European Union. But for some, it is allowed, and for some, it is not allowed to put national interests first. And we were very smart. I'm talking on behalf of other Central European member states as well. Very smart to learn the rules of the game quickly. And we said, why not these freedoms, these rights in the European Union, which are there in the treaty, could work for our benefit, like freedom of the capital, freedom of the labor force. And we managed to have an own economic policy using the European rules. Sometimes we had some infringement procedures, but we won the case in the court. So we were allowed to use different pricing in energy policy. We were always against the liberal markets of energy because we said that the state has to somehow guarantee for the citizens a certain price. And this was our own method, which now everybody is using in the energy crisis. This is the Hungarian model, actually. So we just wanted to change this status quo, this economic status quo, to use the rules for our own benefit. It is not contrary, the rules. It is not against Europe. It is just, should be the normal way of functioning as a member state. And we are honest in our political and external policy towards our partners. We always name the game. Ambassador used to be State Secretary for European Affairs during the toughest times, let's say. So he also took part in these fights. And we were always honest. Look, my aim is to reconquer the energy market for Hungarian businesses because it was sold out by the socialists and the liberals to foreign companies. It's a big insecurity for the nation if the energy is not in the hands of Hungarian businesses or the state. So we said, okay, we do our best using European rules to take it back. And we managed with market rules, with all legal things. But, the status quo is still damaged for the old member states. So I think many reasons for our problems are also rooted in this. But we are for Europe, we are Europeans, and we don't want to be elsewhere. Thank you.
Well, that's fantastic. Madam Minister, if there's anything that you'd like to say before we close out, this has been such an enjoyable conversation this afternoon, and hearing your remarks has been incredible. So.
Thank you very much. There's nothing left to say that to humbly thank for your attention. Thank you for this interest in our issues, and I will be always at your disposal if you have some questions or don't understand what you read in the mainstream liberal media about my country, especially in Politico or in CNN. Please don't believe them. And ask us first, or the ambassador, whether it is 100% correct or not. Because this was what I did when I used to live in Brussels. I read the news, and instead of a cafe, I just read the news, and my blood pressure went up. And I sent my comments to my friends, and please read this article with my corrections, because this is not 100% true. And just not to be seen like big-headed. We know we are not perfect. We also make mistakes. Sometimes we can be even selfish towards national interest. But we are like everyone or every other country in the world, trying to fight for our rights, trying to fight for economic interests, and during this way, we are also committing some mistakes, and then there is a correction, but it does not mean that we are the only black sheep in the world, which is actually pressure from the mainstream media. So those who are our friends and cooperating with us, they all get off very well. This is what's said by Mr. Prime Minister Orbán. So thank you very much for your attention.
Well, thank you so much once again, and it's just been a joy having you here. And you're not the black sheep. You're another great point of light in the country that we are all following so closely. So thank you for coming. It's been wonderful to host you here at Heritage.
Thank you very much. It was an honor for me. Thank you.